When getting a little closer, I noticed that he was breathing with his, more or less with his flank, which indicated a heave. A little closer observation determined that one eye was cloudy, and for a long time he hadn't been able to see out of it. When I looked in his mouth, the teeth were extremely long and at a very acute angle, which indicated that, or just estimating his age, I would say to be around 30, 35 maybe. But he was in pretty fair physical shape. The people, of course, all they wanted me to do was give him a shot so that he could get over his cough and be all right. When I added up the score, the laminitis, of course, made him very gentle and stable. He wouldn't run away. And the poor vision would keep him from moving very fast. His extreme old age would slow him down some. The fact that he had the heave indicated that he wouldn't be able to hold out. So I couldn't agree with him more that he was really safe and for the little kids to climb up on, because it wasn't likely that he would buck and run away. As tactfully as I knew how, I suggested to him that this condition was probably going to be with him the rest of his life, and that when we added up the score, he had several things wrong with him. It might be well before they got too attached to him, even though he was a sorrel with a flax mane and tail and white stockings, that they contact their trader, who I knew, and this was a typical product of his. I suggested to them that they ease back to the man and suggest that he take it to the sale and let them get whatever they could. I assured them that they probably wouldn't get what they'd paid for him, but that I thought that they'd better get what they could. So happened the next Saturday night, we went to the auction, and I had a horse to sell. I sold my horse, and as I was going through the line, I happened to be right behind the horse trader that had sold him this horse, and he had taken it back over and sold it. I don't remember what it brought it to sale, but it brought a whole lot more than it was worth, and which was a whole lot less than what they had paid for it, I'm sure. But as I happened to be behind the old horse trader as we were waiting in line to get our check, I said, "Say, that sure was a fine pony that you ran through there." He said, "Yeah." I said, "I sure did hate to see him go." See someday.
So what?
1 3/4.
And
$1,000.
wow. And what else?
$6,000. Divided by 16 heads. Just got the latest word on my Doberman pincher that I've been associated with for a couple of years. Quite an interesting case. The word is, incidentally, that she's doing fine. She's a heart patient, and we thought we'd lose her last week. But to start from way back yonder, she was a beautiful Doberman pinscher with nice ears, and when he brought her into the clinic, she could do anything in the world to her, just as nice as she could be. Well, at that time I was interested in a Doberman pinscher for myself, and this guy had a heart condition himself and was not able to, at this time, when she was getting ready to come in, he wasn't able to take care of her and had to go to the hospital, and I have open heart surgery, I believe. So I said, "I'll tell you what, my kennel boy that helped me, he wanted a Doberman pinscher. Tell you what we'll do. We'll just take her and keep her here, and we'll breed her to a good dog, and we'll, of course, give a stud pup, and I'll get one, the kennel boy get one, and you can have all the rest of the pups, and otherwise she'd lose a litter." Well, it just suited him fine, so everything was going fine. And of course, I'm here all the time, never leave, except the very time that she got ready to have her pup. I went to a civic club convention in another state, and it came time for her to have her pup. This dog, we didn't know the history of it, even the owner didn't. And apparently she wasn't able to have labor successfully, so he had to take it to another veterinarian, and they took x-rays and put around. Finally cost them almost $100. And lo and behold, she had 3 pups. 3 pups. That was one for the stud fee, one for me, and one for the kennel boy, and that left none for the man. So, of course, we assured him that we wouldn't take any of the pups. It cost him so much, and we just forego our end. But when he took them home, she killed one pup immediately and destroyed another one eventually, and they raised the one pup on a bottle. Beautiful pup, fine pup, and the best personality you ever saw. And when he got 3 months old, we trimmed the ears, and we didn't brace them at all. They just stood up beautiful. Just couldn't ask for a nicer dog. Of course, he knew that the mother dog wasn't going to live forever, so this would be a nice replacement for this fella. His poor son-in-law went out to drain after the pup got 5 or 6 months old, went out and drained the antifreeze out of his car to work on it. And the puppy went up and lapped the antifreeze and killed him. Graveyard dead. So then, it wasn't long until the dog then came in with a condition. We checked her over and thought, well, what the heck, we got this electrocardiogram, doesn't auscultated and nothing sounds bad. We'll take an electrocardiogram, which we got. We checked kidney function, liver function, they were all right. And on electrocardiogram, it was obvious that she had a severe ectopic ventricular beat, which means that the ventricle or the big heavy muscle was beating on its own other than from the impulse that it's supposed to put out. And she was running some temperature and a high white cell count, so we knew we had a bacterial infection. So we, on the basis of this, we diagnosed a myocarditis. Myocarditis, of course, was an infection of the myocardial muscle. So we sent the electrocardiogram down to the cardiologist at the School of Veterinary Medicine. We can work with them, and they suggested, of course, that we put it on cardoxin, which we on the digitoxin, you know. So we did, and we kept her on antibiotics then for 2 or 3 weeks, and we kept her on this digitoxin for about a month, and she made a complete and uneventful recovery. And sometime later, I was out at his farm, and there was this dog that I had so much to do with that I could do anything to at the clinic, and lo and behold, she wouldn't even let me out of my vehicle. She would cut me in two, apparently. So then, not too long ago, she came back in and was having real problems again. And this has been about a year, and apparently she's having scar tissue or some problem, even though the electrocardiogram didn't show too severe symptoms to me. We sent it to a cardiologist, and they said, yes, you have got a heart problem. We sent blood serum to the diagnostic laboratory. They did all sorts of enzyme tests, and they determined that there is some muscle damage, not specifically heart or a torn ligament in the leg. But did a lot of supplementary stuff and white blood cell counts and so on and so forth. And sure enough, again, we did have a myocarditis. And she's back on the heart medicine. She'll be on the heart medicine the rest of her life. And the owner checked with the owner today, and she's doing fine. And she's back to where if I were to step out in his yard, she'd chew me up again. Which goes to show you that sometimes they'll bite the hand that helps them. Riding through the countryside today reminded me of a case many years ago. I see this man occasionally, and he grits his teeth and looks the other way every time he sees me. And justly so. He called me out some 8 or 10 years ago, and he had an old $100 horse there that apparently had dropped his head down over a spike of some sort, and he was bleeding right in between his jawbones, way up in the throat area. Well, I had 2 more calls to make, and I rushed out there. I didn't have any anesthesia to put the horse to sleep. I thought, man, now here's a case where the horse should be anesthetized, put on an operating table, and an incision would have to be made under the throat to try to find the blood vessel up in that area, because there's a jillion of blood vessels and nerves and cartilages and so forth in between the mandibles of the throat. So instead of, I didn't think about it. I should have referred him to veterinary clinic, load him up and take him 20 miles down the road and have him where they have operating table, and they have 2 or 3 veterinarians to work together. But now, best I remember, he didn't want to move it. He didn't have a way to haul it. He wanted you to do something here. So I knew that I just didn't have the time to go back to the clinic and get all the stuff and come back out there and spend all day working on that horse. And I really didn't know what for sure I was going to get into. So I just took some gauze and packed it in between his throat and wrapped a bandage around his chin and said, well, maybe pressure would take care of it. It was an arterial bleeding, but it wasn't real big. But I didn't know if it'd work or not. But I just made a stab in the dark. Well, the man, as soon as I left, he decided that wasn't too smart. And so he called veterinarians from another town, and as luck would have it, the horse died before they got there. And of course, they made an incision, which was easy to do on a dead horse, and said, look up in there, this is, of course, what he should have done. He should have incised and ligated and tied off the offending artery. But every time I go around that corner, I think about that horse and I think about that man. And I'm sure as long as I live, he'll say, "There's the dude that killed my horse." And of course, you think back now, well, what could you have done? I should have just referred him to somebody else and said, "I can't handle him." And then if he died on the other feller, then he wouldn't have been mad at me. Sometimes you can really try to help somebody, and maybe it doesn't work out too good, and maybe you're at fault somewhat. This fella that I had done a lot of work for and had sent me other people to do calls, and a nice fella, had this cow. As a matter of fact, he milked 3 or 4 cows, and he sold raw milk to his neighbors. Now, that sort of thing is not really legal. You're not supposed to sell raw milk, but nobody enforces a thing like that because the people get it because they want it, and he takes care of his cows, and he doesn't sell any milk from bad cows. But it's not pasteurized. It's not, not homogenized. So he calls me out there one time, and we test the cow. Maybe one of them had lost a calf or something, and one of the cows turned up a suspect. Well, knowing that this guy was selling raw milk, and this if you drank milk, unpasteurized milk from a cow that has undulant fever, has brucellosis, it will cause a person to have undulant fever. And I was very anxious that he move this cow out of his herd. So when it came back a suspect, I suggested to him that he'd sell her right now, and rather than keeping her around, and then test the others. Well, it so turned out about that time they had come up with a new method of evaluation for brucellosis. There was the method that we had used, which we tested out a suspect, and then they had other things that they could do, and what they would do, they would evaluate all the methods and add up the score, and in some instances they would call them a suspect, some instances reactors, and some instances negative. So about some weeks after he sold his cow, my recommendation, they came back with this new analysis, and they said, well, she was a suspect on this test, but she was negative on this test. Consequently, we will rule the cow negative and say that she doesn't have brucellosis. Well, this guy, he didn't quite understand it. All the thing he understood was that I told him to sell a cow, and the cow was eventually ruled to be negative. And he's looked at me like the other feller did, and he sent, normally instead of making calls for him and his neighbors, I find that he's referring people to other people. And I hate that, because I think he's honest. He feels like that I mistreated him and used poor judgment. And maybe I did, but I could have, if the cow had in fact been a positive, and someone, before this thing was carried out, someone had, some child who had no immunity, drank some of this raw milk, they could get an undulant fever, and he could really be in trouble. But that's just one of the things that you do when you really try to help somebody. You bend over backward to be sure that nobody takes a chance on a situation like that, and you wind up the goat of the whole thing. There's some baffling things that you get into. One particular instance that we saw was a man that would have cattle that would be walking around and apparently looking all right and just fall over dead just all of a sudden. Blood samples, urine samples, everything was done. Just one group of cattle that were close to this big nuclear plant, and as far as I know, no one ever determined the cause of the problem, and lots of cattle were lost. There was another instance where a dairyman would have mastitis in his cows. He'd go out and find that they had little wart-like lesions on the end of the tit and on the area of the tit. These were, pathologists call them papillomas. We gave them wart vaccine. I believe autogenous vaccine was used. Years later, I think it was found that, incidentally, they would sell this cow, and other cows that were brought into the herd and buy new cows. Wouldn't be long until they had the same thing. It was found out sometime later that they cultured a staph organism from the throats of the owners, the milkers of these animals, and that the person was spreading this thing to the cows, and that was the cause of their problem. Right now we're having a situation that is quite baffling. Cows have 3 cases right now, one dead, one just starting out, and one hanging on, where they just develop weakness in the back legs. And searching the literature, we find where certain chemicals used in the in the plastic industry and the insecticide field and in the lubricants, fireproof lubricants, hydraulic fluids, and that sort of thing. Well, a cow can eat it, and some 2 or 3 weeks later, the neurons or the nerve that goes from the muscle, is destroyed, gradually moth-eaten, and they become weak in the back end and then get down. These cattle don't fit the picture 100%. One of them shows severe anemia. One of them doesn't seem to be progressing like it should to fit this picture, so the pathologists are working, and we're waiting, and it's going to be interesting to see what this thing is. Veterinary medicine is really it's really a mystery. It's a lot of things involved in it, because you really, it's not pat answers. Sometimes you never find the answer. Sometimes things that you think are routine and simple are very complicated. And one time we found symptoms of lead poisoning in a calf, and the man had some motor oil that he was putting on a back rubber and had it in a bucket, and the calf walked up with a bucket in his hand, stuck his head down in there and licked it before the man realized what was happening. And he and another one died of lead poisoning. We also have calves that will eat shingles that blow off of a barn or a house, and they have asphalt in them that has chemicals in them that has lead, I believe, and it causes blindness and dumbness and coordination, one thing or another. A very interesting case that I was in on several years ago involved a farmer that would lose 1 or 2 calves every spring, early in the spring. And he'd call and I'd go and look, and well, you know, when you have a young fat animal instead, you just automatically vaccinate for blackleg until you could find something else. Well, it was pretty obvious that didn't fit, but you didn't know what else to do. And at that time, we didn't have a real good diagnostic setup. But some sort of poisoning was suggested or something, but the owner was very insistent that there was nothing on the place. He became quite impatient with me, and of course, after losing several head, and they were very disturbed, and even considered selling the farm because of this cloud hanging over their head. So it was found out later that in one end of their farm, joining another farm, there was an old, kind of a gully where years ago things had been thrown down. There was an old bucket with some paint in it, with some lead paint. And usually calves are the most nosy of the bunch. And in the spring of the year, when they were up in that end of the farm, nosing around, invariably 1 or 2 of them would lick around this lead poisoning, and then they'd, none of the rest of them would be affected, and they'd come down sick. And so the paint was discovered, and it could have stayed there for years and killed 2 or 3 calves every year, infinitum. But it was found that that was a problem, and that was eliminated. The reason people should never ever throw out any kind of trash, buckets, waste materials out in the field. It should be buried, it should be taken to a sanitary field. It causes a lot of problems, and there's a lot of headaches to figure out what the problem is. And of course, you don't have too much success on treating these sort of things. The best thing to do is to prevent them. There had several cases where people would buy a chemical to kill Bermuda grass. It's hard to kill. Never paid to diagnose anything on the radio. I don't know how many times that people have called me up and I've said, why, yes, I know what that is, and it'll come out. Not too long ago, this lady called and said that she had a mare that belonged to her child, and it had a open sore on at the end of the mane, kind of on the up top of the shoulder, she said. So I said, well, that would be at the withers, and I'm sure that would be fistula of the withers. It's just a big old sore and running. She said, well, it's not running too much, but it's swelled up there. So I said, well, that's a bad deal. That's brucellosis or Banks disease. It's undulant fever in people, brucellosis in cattle, and causes fistula of the withers in horses. And you don't want to keep a horse like that. You want to sell him to the tankage man, to the dog food man, and get you another horse. And she said, oh, my little girl is just crazy about this horse. She said, would you please come look at it? And I said, I sure would. When I got there, the little girl had been called out of school because she was the only one who could catch the horse. And we walked out, and she walked out into a 10-acre field and whistled, and the horse came running. She had tears in her eyes, and her face was all swollen, and she could just hardly move, and she put her rope around the horse's neck, almost like an executioner. And when she pulled the horse up to where I could see it, it was pretty obvious that our fears were all unfounded, that this was a little old sit-fight type of thing, a little old root hair infection up on the mane that didn't involve the fistula, the withers at all. Was not fistula withers. There's no problem whatsoever. And the little girl just cried, and so did the mother, and all I could do to keep from having to wipe my eyes out, because it was really a great and joyous occasion. It's like finding out that your dear beloved mother didn't have cancer or something. See, people are funnier than anybody else. I just got this in on the dog from town down the road away. I have several people from that town. This man comes several times a year. It's a very good client. People around me, next door neighbors, they take their dogs 20 miles down the road, and their neighbors bring their dog to me because, you know, if you take your dog a ways, you always feel like that you've got more expert care. Same way with medical doctors, dentists, and what have you. A lot of people apparently like to go somewhere else so that they can get that extra special professional care. It's probably some truth to that, because anybody is flattered if a person comes past the doors of 3 or 4 other veterinarians to get to your door. Then you think, well, if they think that much of me, then I will take special care of the dog, and I'll look at it and I'll talk to them, and we'll try to do a real good job, because we know that they're real concerned, or else they would, they just go to whoever was the closest or whoever was the cheapest. Sometimes you never know just exactly what you're working on. The other day I had a beautiful filly come in. We put her to sleep and sutured a torn place on her fetlock. It was pretty obvious that she was an animal of outstanding breeding and had the best of care. But it was only a few days ago, after all the treatment was over and she was well, that I found out that she had already been sold and was being held for the new owner. Sales fee was $80,000. If I hadn't known that I was working on that type of animal, I would have probably been scared to death. It was a good thing that I didn't know that, because there's a lot of things can happen in anesthesia and horse. Sometimes the horse has an exceptional reaction. Sometimes they become over sensitive to it. They'll quit breathing, could even die. Sometimes they don't have enough anesthetic effect on them, and they thrash around, break their legs, beat their head against the ground, and knock an eye out, or break out a tooth, or cause paralysis of the lip or limb. A lot of things can happen. The practice of veterinary medicine, as most of us are able to do it in a general practitioner's way, is you don't have all the facilities that you would have around the areas where they do specialize in this sort of thing. And of course, that's very expensive. You have to have a lot of expensive equipment and a lot of help, a lot of people that are really skilled in handling these kind of horses, padded stalls and that sort of thing. So the average country practitioner takes this horse out on the grass, gives him an anesthetic, he falls flat on the ground, and you do then whatever you need to do. Sometimes you need to apply a little psychology in this thing. I remember years ago I went to a man's place when we were under the fee basis program testing for Bang's disease. It was at no expense to the farmer. He was to get the cattle up and we were to do the blood testing. And then we would go on to the next farm. Well, this man was a very contrary type of a character. He maybe was mad, maybe he didn't want it. He was required to do the testing. Apparently he didn't want to do it. And nothing seemed to suit him too well, and finally he said, I've got a cow there that's got a sore foot. Said, I'm going to doctor her. Well, it was my shoot in my time, so I said, well, I'll tell you what, if we're going to doctor her, just let me doctor her. So I caught the cow's head. I gave her a bottle of medicine intravenously. I picked up her foot and took a hoof knife and cleaned it out. I cleaned out the wound and put a drug in the wound and then I bandaged it. Oh, he griped and grumbled and moaned, and he wasn't going to do all that. All he was going to do is give him a shot. I said, well, I'll tell you what, if I'm going to treat the cow, I'm going to treat him my way. And he said, well, what I owe you for that? And I said, you don't owe me a thing. And the man was really set back. He was really abashed. And his countenance changed completely, and through the last 20 years, I've never seen a nicer, more agreeable person in all my life, because I gave him a soft answer, which was the thing to do at the time. I'm not always that. just just checked in a dog for a lady that has quite an interesting experience. This dog is a very nervous dog, and when she brought it in to me, she didn't say anything about it being nervous. She was very particular. She checked over everything, wanted to be sure that everything was done up to snuff, and she let me know that she'd been to veterinarians in the big city and she knew what to expect, that sort of stuff. So she finally decided that my place was adequate to keep her dog. But her dog took its teeth and grabbed on my doors on my cages and just chewed and pulled and did everything in the world she could to tear the thing up, and scratched and was really a bad keeper. It wasn't too long that the woman came in a very irate state, and she said, I took my dog to another veterinarian, and he looked at his teeth, and he said, this dog has distemper teeth, and my dog got distemper at your place, and blah, blah, blah. Well, of course I knew that was not true in the first place. Distemper teeth is any modeling or abnormality or deformity in the laydown of enamel in a young dog when his teeth are being formed. You can't have a deforming problem in an adult dog's teeth because the teeth are already made. They're not remade periodically. They're just made when they're young. And if the dog happens to be sick from distemper or any other condition, they do have model teeth. So I explained to her then that the veterinarian who saw the teeth called them distemper teeth, but I don't think he was accusing me of giving your dog distemper in other circumstances. I said, you checked with your veterinarian that you had before, and you let somebody else talk to you about this situation. And finally she cooled down, and she got over her little hostility and has been very meek and humble ever since. It's been a good client. We've treated several animals for her, but many times people are afraid. They're afraid of the unknown. They don't know you, and they're just afraid that that maybe you're not going to treat their animal right, and so they come in defensively. And when they find out, in fact, that you are interested in the animal, you do like the animal, and you do take care of the animal, then they will appreciate you, and they just seem to appreciate you more and more as time goes on. Of course, you have the occasional person. We had one years ago that came in with a dog to be boarded some 3 or 4 days, and when she picked the dog up and took it home, it had some eczema, moist eczema on its back. Now, when you board a dog at the fees that we get, which is not profitable, it's more of a convenience for the owner, and many times these hot spots, as we call it, will come up in a day or its time, and if a dog, say for instance, comes in with a tick bite on it, and it gets to scratching at it, it can be all right. When it came in, and the next day it can have a big old sore spot. Well, the dog, we didn't find any hot spot on the dog, but when she got home, she looked over it real good, found this sore spot, and she told everybody that we didn't take care of their dogs, that we ran a filthy place, and that her dog caught the mange at our place, and she's never been back. And I'm sure that her neighbors have never been back here. But that's just some of the things that you have to put up with in this business, because, and I'm sure she was honest. She probably felt like, we had a filthy old place down there and got mange germs crawling around on the wall, and one of them jumped on her dog's back and ate the hide off. But, of course, that's not the case. I was talking to the big doctor one time, and I said, how is it that I knew that this person had accused him wrongly of a problem on an animal, and it didn't seem to bother him at all. He just kind of whistled and grazed his teeth together and didn't say anything, a man of great composure. After they left, I said, how in the world can you stand there and take that when there's no way in the world that stupid person could blame you for their condition? He said, well, Doc, he says, I've done so many things that I didn't get caught at. I figure I'm way ahead to take blame for a few things that I didn't do. Many of the problems that we have in animals are due strictly just to poor deal stupidity and poor breeding. For instance, you have an animal the female that is not able to have her pups. You do a cesarean on her, you save her life, you save the pups. What does the owner do? He takes one of her pups with the same problems, the same situation, and raises pups from it. And the chances of it having a problem are much more than a normal dog. You should use a little common sense, and anytime you breed any kind of animal, first place you should only breed a desirable animal. In this country, how many times do we see an animal that's completely worthless and no good? So they say, well, has no value, so we'll just use it for breeding, which gives you a 50-50 chance of having another animal of no value. That's true, be it in the horse, cow, dog, cat, what have you, any business, any animal should be that way. In other words, let's say, for instance, you have a dog that's say a real good dog, a bird dog, or a guard dog, or a cow working dog, or something like that. Well, they say, well, it's a good working animal, and we don't want to raise puppies from it because we want to use it for whatever it was, selected for. But we've got another one over here that's no good, and it's no good to go hunting, so we'll breed it, and because she's got nothing else to do, and we'll raise puppies. Well, that's making progress in reverse. You should take the outstanding animal and breed her in the off season, or select good puppies from her. Then, if you want a working dog for life, have her spayed and keep the bloodline into some of her pups. In this instance, has had where dogs were brought in from foreign countries. They were exotics. They were due different, and they made this big deal about you can only register them. You have to be selected, and that which meant that you had to have $500. And then they would make you sign a certificate. The dog would be trained and used, and of course everybody lied and signed the certificate. Bred the dog just as quick as they could and tried to sell them for half what they paid for theirs to get the money back. And first thing you know, you have a group of the dumbest, stupidest, deformedest, no-accountist animals that you ever saw. That's just the American way. The dogs come in from a place like Germany, where they're very particular, and the dogs are destroyed if they don't come up to standards. While I'm talking about that, sometimes you have to be a little bit more careful about how you talk. I had these people who came in, and they were from a foreign country. They understood and spoke English real well, but if you kind of had a fumble voice like I do, they didn't understand always. They had a white boxer pup, and the remark was made by me that over in Germany, where these dogs were originally bred, white was an off color. It is in this country too. You can't register. But over there, they would destroy all white pups to keep off colors from getting in their bloodlines. And so these people immediately gave me a kind of a very fearsome look. And I noticed that sometimes later, a person who was normally and always a client of mine brought in a box of puppies that had already had his ears trimmed, was already well for shots. And I thought, well, now, why would these people take their dogs somewhere else? And so I just asked them. I said, not trying to be nosy. They said, oh, but the lady that sold them to us stipulated that they would sell it to us provided that he wasn't brought to me. I had a lady working for me, and she had a child that overheard a conversation at a grocery store. And the little child was very upset and came home and told his mother. And she says, well, does he, kill people's dogs if he doesn't like them? And she said, why, mercy, no. Where'd you get an idea like that? She said, oh, these ladies said that if somebody came in with a dog that wasn't the right color, he would just kill it, and that would be the end of it. So I ran into these people. I noticed they never did come back. And they had been in several times before. And I ran into them, and I talked to them, and I said, I believe we've got a communication breakdown. And I said, she said, "Oh, but we thought that you said that you would kill any white boxer. And we just loved our dogs and we didn't want them killed. And we were afraid that you would do that." And I said, "Well, of course we didn't. You just misunderstood. I wouldn't make the judgment to destroy some dog." But that was I was just a small talk commenting the fact that they are an off color, they're not registrable, and in the old country they'll usually destroy these sort of things, and they got the idea that I was out to kill all white baby puppies. This goes to show you that small talk can turn into big talk sometimes if people don't understand what you mean. I like animals. I always have, from a little child all the way up. I had hamsters and pigeons and rabbits, guinea pigs, and chickens, ponies, horses, dogs, one thing or another all my life, and still do right now. I've got cows, 3 different breeds. I've got a couple of horses, registered quarter horses. I've got Doberman Pinscher dog. I've had Welsh Corgi dogs, Dachshunds, and half-breeds and mixed-up dogs that people come along and want to get rid of, and you know, you like them, and there's really no such thing as a bad breed of dog or a mixed-up dog. Some of the best pets we've ever had were mixed breed of dogs. But I really think we have a lot of sick people when it comes to loving dogs. I've seen, for instance, women come in hugging on a dog and kissing it and talking sweet to it, and snap and growl and yank at their little child who sits over in the corner all sour and dejected looking. And I can understand a person being upset about their dog being sick, but you can tell that the dog was wanted and the child wasn't. And a lot of the problems that we see in this world today are from these children who never did get the hugging and the kissing and the attention that the dog got. And in many instances, the dog is neurotic, the child is psychotic, the people are frustrated, and it's an unhappy thing all the way, unhealthy situation all the way around. I think animals are really to be enjoyed. I think they're to be used. If they become unsatisfactory pets, if they bite people, if they're unable to control their body functions properly, or they're in more pain, I think they should be put to sleep. I think that's one of the advantages of being an animal. If life is no more a pleasure, you can painlessly and easily put them out of this condition. And whereas in people, if you have a long, lingering, and painful, expensive situation, then you're just required to endure it, regardless of how painful it may be. So I really believe that animals are not people, and people are not animals, and I don't like to see anything abused, but I certainly don't like to see people abused, and I don't think people should be elevated over animals. I think the key to it is that we choose the animals that we want, but we don't always choose the people that we're connected with, and that's the reason that a lot of times people are unhappy with a relationship with people. I had a situation one time where this animal was brought in injured. Very well-to-do person was very upset about the animal, and I thought the circumstances under which it happened to it was just a little bit unusual, but kind of kept it back in my mind. The animal died, and sometime later, a member of the family had an injury, not too severe, but somehow or another I could see that animal, that little puppy that was probably battered. So I had occasion to run into the medical doctor, who I knew treated this family, and I made mention that there could be a problem. And sure enough, sometime later, he came to me and he says, you know, we had a situation where the child was injured, and with your inside information, I made a few questions, and it turned out that this person did have a problem with his emotions, and we had a child abuse situation diagnosed by the help of the veterinarian. And as far as I know, that situation has been improved just by the fact that it was known about. So there's a lot of things you can tell. The veterinarian can tell a lot about the family and the people that he's associated with. We find dogs sometimes are highly nervous and upset, and when you question just a little bit, you find I know one young girl said that my parents don't get along and they fight all the time, and it upsets my dog. Well, you know, it upset her too, but you can tell from some of the things that you get into about the situation that about the family life of the people. I think veterinarians have a unique position in setting up high and looking down on the world that they're in. They can see things that are much more obvious. I think we ought to have more veterinarians in the government services, because it's a very practical field. We know that, you know, if an artery is bleeding, you tie it off, you ligate it, or you pack it, or you do something to stop it. In the field of government, if you see a waste, a veterinarian would have a tendency to want to stop that waste rather than distribute it out in his home field so that his people could get a little cut of the pie, realizing that when you kill the goose that laid the golden eggs, you don't have the goose of the eggs either. And I really believe that we're unique in that we can see things because we're away from it, and we can see things in the community, we can see things in people, we can see things in government, we can see things in administration of state, county, city, school, what have you. I believe we think a little bit more practically. Some of the medical doctors, some of the legal people don't have the advantage that we do. If a person goes into the doctor's office and he tells them that they have ham and eggs and whole wheat bread for breakfast and orange juice, and they have steak and potatoes for lunch, and they have country ham and hot biscuits. The doctor, he doesn't go to the house, he doesn't know what the people, but the veterinarian goes to the person's house in many instances. He sees the family, he sees the situation where the mother doesn't have anything in the house but cigarettes and beer, and you can see malnutrition, you can see bad management, you can see a lot of things and that the medical doctor can't tell about them. He can only guess, because he can guess on a lot of these things. But we see the farm. We find that with this poor ground, they have poor livestock. The people themselves don't have the mental capacity. They don't have the energy. They don't produce. They reproduce, but they don't produce too great. On the other hand, you go to the farm that has been well cared for, or is naturally rich and hasn't been wasted. They have good equipment. If you see a man with good equipment, then you see a man with, usually his animals are well taken care of. If he has a shed for his tractor, he usually has a barn for his cow. If he has equipment and tools and facilities to work on his tractor, he'll almost always have working pens and head catchers for his cattle. If his car sits out under his tree and a tractor on the hillside, you better bet you've got to have your rope ready when you go to his farm, because you're going to have to catch the cow out in the middle of the field, and the fence is probably not going to be too good, so you better catch her on the first lick. Some 20 years ago when I was in the military, I went to this place down in Florida, air base. They had no airplanes, no sentry dogs, not really too much for a veterinarian to do. We had a hospital, however, and high brass would come down from all over the Air Force, have surgery, to have treatment, one thing or another. And they would file a report saying that the facilities were adequate, the care was good, the professional care was good. But one thing we can't understand, why there were roaches all over the place. And we, as a matter of fact, would amuse ourselves by feeding our leftover food to the roaches and watch them come up and eat. Of course, that was part of the dumb problem. Stupid people wouldn't fed the roaches, they wouldn't come out, but everybody did it. Well, this caused quite a bit of complaint. A special civilian entomologist came down and wrote up a special Air Force plan, a roach plan. Now, this guy was kind of a nut. He was a PhD entomologist, and he would take his finger and thump his temple and say, "To catch a roach, you must think like a roach." Well, I immediately thought, well, why don't we go to the hardware store and get a 50-cent gator roach hive and stick it over here and poison all these roaches and be through with it. But our very excellent insect and rodent control man said, "Oh, I have just been schooled and schooled and schooled, and we don't want any kind of poison of any kind around those little babies in the hospital. So we don't want a roach trap that would have poison in it, that a roach might go out and die somewhere, and somehow in the world a day old baby would get it, I don't know." But that was the theory behind it. So our expert advised us that roaches come out between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning. So they set up this Air Force regulation, and we had our own roach hunt once a month from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. The crew consisted of one of my techs, in one particular instance, a staff sergeant, tech sergeant. This tech sergeant was a little bit embarrassed, so he came drunk. He was about 6'5", weighed about 205, and he was pretty well polluted. Then the insect and rodent control man, who's very dedicated and had all kinds of commendations. And then there was a man from the installation engineers, kind of a building maintenance man. And we put on our khaki shorts and our hats, and we felt like Dr. Livingston going through Africa. And so we marched through unannounced behind the bars at the officers' club, and through the kitchen after the party was over, where all the food was left out. And the man had a good idea. You know, roaches eat. You know, used to looking for roaches at 10 o'clock in the morning when the officer's making an inspection, but they don't get anything to eat then because everything is clean. Then we went out through the garbage storage at midnight to see how the garbage looked at midnight. Stalked through the hospital amongst this convalescent people, looking for the villain, the roach. Our insect and rodent man was very efficient. He had him a stainless steel pump-up spray, and he could hit a real fine point and go 10 feet and just really lay one on his head. He was an excellent shot. We killed many roaches individually, not to mention the few that we stepped on. But mainly our function was to find out where the roaches were. So we would go through, and the food service man was with us also. We'd say, "Aha! In the officers' club at 12 o'clock in the morning, somebody left the banana pudding on the table and the roaches were eating it." So the food service officer took care of all the food problems and chewed out anybody that left anything open. And then if we found a crack in the wall where the roaches hurried off as we stampeded them, then the installation engineers would write a work order up, which was probably never taken care of, and plaster up all the cracks so the roaches wouldn't have any place to get in or out. And then the insect and rodent control man would notice any problems where they would breed that he could treat, and he would treat them individually. Of course, I was the coordinator. But it was quite an interesting thing. You can imagine a big drunk tech sergeant and the veterinarian, the food service man, all plodding through there, each filling out his own report. and making our attack on the roach population. Just last month I had a roach problem in my kennels here, and I went out to the discount store, and for about $1 I got a little roach outfit and just did a beautiful job. Eliminated all the roaches practically in 2 days' time. And it really reminded me of my old war days when the biggest battle that I went up against was the battle of the roach, and the battle of the man against insect, which in the minds of these people who came down for the surgery was stood out, the fact that the roaches were running across the street. Of course, you know, if you live up north and you have roaches, you're a dirty housekeeper. If you live in Florida and you have roaches, you just live in Florida. As I look back through my battle of the meat inspection bureau, I recall a staff sergeant who was a sharp cookie, very skilled, but also a very sneaky type dude. He would be the kind that would go to one man and say, "Boy, you better watch old Joe over here. He's really laying for you. He's going to sock it to you." And then he'd go to the other fellow and tell him the same thing, and then he'd stand back and watch and see if he could get something going. And that was just his game, just the way he operated. It took me a long time to figure him out. The Army does the grading of meat, and they send it into the commissary, which is cut up by the meat market and sold to the military dependents, and also goes to the kitchens for feeding. And they have to meet a certain requirement, but it's really the duty of the inspector at the killing plant to grade it and accept it as being within grade or not in grade. And if you're at the meat market and you don't like the quality of the meat, you cannot say that it's out of grade, because you're not a grader. Unless you think that there's fraud, unless you think there's a conspiracy to cheat, that you're not getting the quality of meat that you're paying for, and then you can accuse someone of fraud and instigate an investigation in that way. Well, I wasn't too familiar with the military, and this staff sergeant kept telling me, "Boy," I said, "boy, we're really getting rooked on this meat." He said, "Boy, the guys down at the commissary, the customers are all fussing about it," and said there's just a constant turmoil. Says they're all buying their meat uptown because this stuff is not fitting to eat and all that sort of stuff. Well, being a conscientious, looking out for the government's dollar, we call the Army base and in charge of procurement and complain, and they say, "Well, you can't complain. If you think that you're being cheated, well, then you can call for you can say fraud, but you can't complain about the quality of the meat, and nobody else is complaining but you, and all the meat's coming from this same place." And so this guy just kept on agitating, and so I talked to the MICE commander, who was the hospital commander, medical doctor, and he said, "Well, Bob," he said, "if you think they're hooking it to us, I'll back you all the way." So with this guy's insistence and all, we called for a reinspection on a group of meat, and this man, who turned out to be an old boy that was a year behind me in school, came down and went through the meat, and he kind of griped and grumbled, and he said, "Well, it's not bad, but maybe it's a little bit undergrade, but after all, that's just kind of the way things work." So it wasn't too long until we had the 3rd Army Conference in Atlanta, and I went, and I didn't get chewed out, but I sure did get chewed all around. He was this big old guy, Cornell graduate, looked like he weighed about 240, had biceps on him about like a mule, and he really reamed out about these people that don't know what they're talking about, trying to assess the grade of a meat after it's already in a retail cut, when they've got experts at the chilling floor that are competent, and so on and so forth. And he really let me know that I sure didn't want to get out on a dark street with him. But anyhow, the battle continued, and finally, I believe that the source of meat was stopped. I believe we quit buying. I believe the military did at that time quit buying from this one plant there that was sending the meat to us.